Today's video, we're going to tackle MCIOA, the Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, or 515B, specifically about changes to that state statute. Hopefully you watched our other videos on MCIOA so that you are up to speed on what it is. This video is going to talk about changes to that state statute. Just a refresher, MCIOA applies to every association built after June 1st of 1994. For all condos, regardless of when they were built, you're under the umbrella, the state statute of MCIOA. So a few amendments that we would just want to cover. In 2010, there were some amendments to MCIOA. Most of the amendments that year just related to developer control and how that transitions happen. So probably doesn't relate to you. But one significant thing that was changed that year is the allowance of electronic voting, which has become hugely important and significant now as we're in the COVID pandemic and how we've had to navigate electronic meetings. So now MCIOA, if you're under MCIOA, allows for electronic voting means. It also changed some annual report requirements, which are kind of irrelevant to you, but if you have to look at your documents about what you're required in that annual report every year, which is usually a part of your annual meeting notice, essentially just gives the snapshot of the financial condition of the association. And then finally, one of the significant changes that year was an amendment to how you amend your governing documents and the requirements with mortgage holders. I don't know if you're aware, but usually your governing documents say if you want to change or amend your articles of incorporation, your declaration of covenants, or your bylaws, it oftentimes requires not only the homeowner's approval, but any mortgage holders, any homeowners that have a mortgage, their mortgage holder also has to sign off on the amendment proposal. So this amendment to MCIOA said when you send that ballot to the mortgage holder, if they don't respond after a certain number of days, it's considered a consent. So that was a significant amendment in 2010. In 2012, that was the next year of amendments, and this one is significant because it was about reserve requirements, replacement reserve requirements. And today what we work with and what you know about reserve requirements, this is where it came from. It essentially said a few different things. First of all, that the association has to have a reserve account. It has to separate its money and save for the replacement of the components. And then it has to adequately fund, very subjective, I know, but that's what it says, adequately fund for the replacement of all of those components. It also says that you don't have to fund anything that has a lifespan greater than 30 years, and that you should keep that reserve money in a separate account from your operating checking, and then that you have to reevaluate the adequacy every 3 years of those funds and of the plans for your replacements, which those requirements equal why you have a reserve study today, right? That's what those equal. And then the final thing it said in 2012 in the amendments about reserves is that you can't borrow from the replacement reserve fund and you can't pay for operating expenses out of the reserve fund. You can't pay for a large unexpected water bill if you don't have it in your checking. You can't just take the money from reserves and pay for it that way. You can only pay for replacement items out of that reserve fund. So those were the significant amendments in 2012 regarding replacement reserves. In 2017, there was another significant amendment, and this one was a little bit controversial. 2012 dealt with replacement. 2017 deals with maintenance. So in 2017, the legislators said, we need to make sure that the associations are maintaining associations, not just replacing, but the day-to-day maintenance, that there's a plan in place. So the preventative maintenance plan is now what's required for associations that are under MCIOA. Now, the nice thing about the PMP, the preventative maintenance plan, is that it's not very detailed. It just says that the association has to have a plan, and they have to evaluate that plan and fund that plan. So if you know that you need to paint every 5 years, well, you have to identify that you paint and you have to fund to paint, right? So it's pretty vague, but you do have to have some form of preventative maintenance plan. That was the amendment in 2017. And then finally, the other amendment that we want to cover, and this one is significant. In 2020, there was an amendment to MCIOA to help you if you're pursuing amendments to your documents. If you want to amend your declarations about rental, or if you want to amend your bylaws about your quorum requirements. If you want to amend those legal documents, again, I mentioned earlier that most documents require that not only do you get the homeowner approval, but also mortgage approval. And usually the bylaws is 50% typically approval, and the articles and declaration are usually 67 or 76% of people need to sign off. Well, the amendment was this, that if you sent out the ballot to both the homeowners and the mortgage holders, and if there's no response after a timeline that you give, typically it's 60 days, if there's no response, it's considered a consent or a yes vote. So it made amending documents significantly easier because, let's be honest, no one reads their mail or sends back their ballots, right? So a significant amendment that hopefully is going to help you as you're pursuing amendments to your documents. So that's a snapshot of the significant changes to MCIOA over the last 10 years or over the last 15 years. If you found it helpful, check out other videos on MCIOA and other great board tips and tricks at sharpermanagement.com.